Hello everybody, James with Love My Pups, My Breeder Supply. This video is going to be about breeding dogs 3 different ways. A regular vaginal AI or artificial insemination, a transcervical insemination and a surgical insemination. I want to talk about the anatomy of the dog and what's going on. Alright, so just talk about these things first. So the normal one that we do most of the time is what's called just a regular vaginal AI. So with that, we're just using a syringe and a long AI rod, and we're using that to go in through the vulva and just depositing semen directly into the vagina. We're going to talk about that. Then we're going to talk about transcervical insemination. A transcervical insemination, you use an endoscope, a little camera and light on the end of it, and you go all the way up into the beginning part of the vaginal horns for that. And the last one is a surgical insemination. And with a surgical insemination, you're actually putting an incision on the dog. You have to put the dog under for a little bit, an incision on the tummy, go inside the abdominal cavity, find the uterus, and inject semen directly into uterine horns. So these are the 3 different ways that we do this. Typically, there's an order in terms of the day that you do this. So typically this is done on a progesterone level of 15, and that is normally somewhere between day 11 and 13. The surgical is done with a higher number, and the reason for that is that the semen doesn't have to travel all the way up the vaginal canal. It shaves about a day off. Typically, you'll do this on like a 20 to a 25. And that's typically around day 12 to 14, about a day later. And the transcervical is somewhere between these two numbers, so like an 18 plus for a transcervical. And again, this is done about day 12 to day 14, approximately. All right, so now I want to take that off the board and we're going to talk about the actual anatomy, because I think this is the part that's probably the most useful to people. I just don't see very many people talking about this. And I think it's important to understand, if you're going to take this on yourself, it's important that you understand what the anatomy of the dog is. All right, so be prepared for a lousy picture. So here's a dog. Here's his back, and here's a tail, a little Frenchy tail. And then we've got an opening here, which of course is for the anus. And then we have another opening here. I'm going to draw that like that, which is the vulva, and then the dog's legs are here. So here's the dog's legs. Okay, and here's the dog's belly. That's not too bad. And we're going to draw some ribs in. So the rib cage is typically here. We've got ribs, and we've got a spine. We'll draw the spine here, which obviously goes into the tail. There's the spine, and then we have the actual physical part we're interested in, which is the organs, the sexual organs of the dog. Okay, so what we have here is first thing is we have a bladder down here, and that bladder goes into this opening. So here's the vaginal, and then we have a cervix. We're just going to draw that as a little gap right here. And then that goes into a couple of horns. And there's the uterine horns. There's the uterus. And then they then go to the ovaries. Okay, we can do a bigger draw of this moment. I want to get the first part done first. So the important part here is obviously this is the butt. This is what we poop out of, or the dog does. We're not interested in that. We're going to keep away from that completely. Here's the vagina. We're going to go into the vagina. We're going to be careful about not getting into the bladder. And we are going to either do one of 3 things. We're either going to put semen right here, which is the vaginal. Or we're going to put semen right here, which is the beginning of the uterine horn, which is the TCI. Or we're going to do an incision on the belly and we're going to go right into the horns, and this is for the surgical. So this is this area right here. Okay, so now I'm going to get this off the board, and now we're going to do a blow up specifically of this area here. Okay. A little squirty. Off of there. I'm very bored almost. So now an exploded view on exactly the female's organs. So I'm going to draw this backwards. So here we have, let's see if we're going to draw this. You don't know what the heck I'm doing yet. All right, those are the ovaries. This is the uterine horns. There's two of them. Puppies are born in both sides. This is what's called the os. And the os is at almost at the end of the vaginal vestibule. There's a significant narrowing that happens right in here, just before you get to it. And then it opens up, kind of dangles downwards. And there is folds. So this is now the vaginal wall that I'm drawing here. There's an opening right here. And that opening right there goes to the bladder. So here's the bladder. Goes right there. So there's a bladder, of course that's got urine in it when it's full. And then this thing comes out to the vulva. Here's the rest of the dog. And the anus is up here. And here's the dog's tail. All right. So, now we've got the whole thing exploded up, we can get a better idea. So it's kind of interesting. The first thing is that you can see, so remember that there's 3 different kinds of insemination. The last one, the surgical AI, we're putting semen directly into these horns. We intubate, we put it on anesthetic, we put the dog laid out on the table with its belly faced up, we shave its belly, we go in through the abdominal wall, we find these uterine horns, we take a syringe with needle, and we put semen directly into, we'll use a green pen for this, but then draw myself. So the whole thing we're trying to do here, the whole end game of whatever technique we use, is that we're trying to get semen to end up right there, because that's what will get a dog pregnant. So what happens in the pregnancy is the ovaries produce eggs. Those eggs travel down through the oviducts. The oviducts are this thing here and here. And they then deposit themselves on the walls of the uterus. And when that's happened, we have to have about 2 days for those eggs to be mature enough so they can then be fertilized by the sperm. So that's what the sperm's got to get to. So when a dog is doing it itself, it's ejaculating here. The semen then has to swim all the way up into this area here to find the eggs. And that takes about a day for those sperm to find their way up there. And that's why we had to have a lot of it, a couple of 100 million motile sperm to be successful, because most of them just don't make it. They die on the way. But enough of them hopefully make it up there to find the eggs and fertilize the eggs. All right, so surgical, do an incision, put the semen right in there. It's expensive, got to get your timing right. There is a small risk to the dog because it has to be physically, they can get an infection going on, and then you've got the worries of anesthesia. I'm not saying this to put you off, but there's nothing wrong with surgical AIs. Anyway, but that's the one way. Okay, so the next way is that we take an AI rod. Let's choose a suitable color here. We take an AI rod. So what we have is we have a syringe here. And that syringe, of course, has got our semen in it. There's the semen. And we then attach that to an AI rod. And we get that AI rod, and it's long enough AI rod that we can actually get in quite a ways up in there. In fact, maybe all the way up to here. So it's interesting to look at this part of it, because there's a couple of things that you've got to be aware of here when you do this. The first thing is It's an up and then it goes straight. You don't want to get into the bladder. Now, I have never, ever, ever got remotely close to getting into a bladder, and I just don't think that you can get it done. But still, got to be aware of the fact there is a bladder there. And if somehow you manage to get that tip into the bladder, the dog is not going to like you at all. And that dog's going to be yelping and screaming, and you won't have got much of the rod in, and you just back it out and stop. Never had it happen to me, but I guess it can happen because I see everybody always talks about be careful for the bladder. So what I do is I put my finger in here first, and then I put the rod, because my finger would be a lot bigger, my finger's all the way up to here somewhere. So if I was drawing my finger would come up to here, and I would be putting this over the top of my finger. So my finger is basically blocking off any opening to the bladder. So it goes above my finger. So the interesting thing here is you'll notice that this vaginal wall has folds in it. It's not a smooth, straight tube. It's got convoluted areas. And so it's very easy to get the rod where it doesn't want to go in very far. And the reason, and I'm going to get rid of this for the sake of being able to draw this properly. So the problem can be is that you've got the rod in here, and the rod then hits. The rod's down here. We've only got a little bit of the rod in so far, and it hits this wall, and you can't get in far enough. So what do? Well, you put your finger in there, and you wiggle everything around, and you twizzle this rod around, and you push the rod in and out gently, and you eventually get past these folds. And as you do that, you get more and more of the rod in there, and we're starting to get the rod up in this area here. Still not got all the rod in yet. So, there is a definite narrowing before you get to this is called the vaginal vestibule. This is a dead end. You are not going to get this rod up into, that's not going to, well, there's a thing called the Scandinavian method, and actually there's a technique that you can use that I don't know how to do, but basically you manipulate the dog's stomach and you can actually get this rod all the way up into here. It's called the Scandinavian method. That's, I mean, I've never seen it done. I don't know of anybody who does it, but I mean, absolutely you can see there's techniques for it. But the point here is that you're going to get this rod in, and you're going to get it in at least past your finger, Your finger is going to come up to about here somewhere. A dog's penis is going to get up to here somewhere. You can get through this narrow opening. For a dog that is at the right time to breed, this opening opens up a little, this narrowing opens up a little bit, and if you or really get your timing right and your technique right, you absolutely can get this rod all the way up into here. And I know I'm showing the rod bent, but you can move this whole structure, it's kind of flexible, and you can get your rod all the way up. And you will find in a French Bulldog with an 8-inch tube that your syringe is buried all the way up to the knuckle. And if you do that, you'll all of a sudden feel it move a little bit. It'll move about a ½ an inch or so, and you have got through this narrowing right here. That's perfect. That's what you want to do. If you can put semen in this area right here, that's as good as you can do with an AI rod. Most of the time, you're probably putting semen right in around here somewhere. So what we'd like to do is have a dog that's really open, take our time, twizzle the rod around, move our finger around, move the rod backwards and forwards, and we'll get all the way up into here. Now, sometimes you won't get the rod, I'd say 50% of the time, you don't get the rod in all the way. The syringe is out here somewhere, that's fine. And then you go to push the syringe, because you know you've got it as far as you can, and the syringe won't go. What's happening? Well, the end of this rod is blocked up against the vaginal wall. You just got to back it off a ½ inch, and then it will squirt fine. If you start forcing like crazy, you have a danger of blowing off the rod from the syringe, and then all of that semen just blows up against the back end of the dog, and that is it for that day. You've got to wait till the next day to do an AI, and if it had to be shipped in, you're just messed up. So make absolutely sure that this syringe and AI rod are connected firmly, and don't get too rough with the pushing part. It should push easily. If it doesn't, back it out a little bit. If you've gone all the way in here, you could have got to the point that you've got this thing all the way up against the back end of this is a blind alley. You've got all the way here. You've got into this blind alley. Again, back it off a little bit so the tip is not up against the back of the ball, and go ahead and deposit the semen right there, and that's fine too. Okay, so now we're going to get rid of this, and now we're going to talk about transcervical. So that is a vaginal AI. That is the thing that I get involved in the majority of time with my customers. But the other technique that we have not shown on the diagram yet, which is the transcervical. The transcervical, put this back in here like this. The transcervical insemination. So what is a transcervical? So I'm starting to do this myself now, and I'm getting better at it. So this structure right here, this is called the osseum. This is the osseum, or the os. And the os, and by the way, we've got a side view of the dog here. This is looking at the side of the dog. So his legs are down here, rib cage is up here. This is the side of the dog. So the os is actually kind of a button-shaped structure that sits down inside the top of the vaginal vestibule. And there's an opening up in the top of it, and that's where the semen has to go, and that's where you have to go if you're doing a transcervical insemination. So what happens then is you use an endoscope. So an endoscope is a long rod, and in the end of it, it has three things. It has an opening where the semen can come out, it has a camera, and it has a light. And the whole thing's about as thick as my finger. And then this thing goes back, the one I have goes back to an actual physical LCD screen, and it has a handle on it. And you can push that in there. And you get that all the way up in here, and you've got basically a flexible rod you can pass through the middle of this before you ever attach. This rod goes all the way through. This is a terrible drawing. Let's just redo it. Show you what an endoscope looks like. So here's the endoscope. I should have brought it with me so I could show it to you, but I haven't. All right, we're going to blow it up a little bit. So it's a rod, tube, and in the middle of that tube, there is an opening that goes all the way out the back end of the endoscope. There's an opening that goes all the way out the back like this. So this thing then comes down to some kind of a handle that you can hold on to. I better draw it the right color here. Some handle that you can hold on to. So this is the place that you can then pass a steel wire, stainless steel wire through, so you can move the end around. And then right here, there's two things. There is a light, so we can look and see what's going on. And then there's physically a camera here as well. So we can then have a computer screen, and on that computer screen, we can see what's going on at this end. Right, so what do? So we put this whole thing up in there, move it around, we can see what's going on as we do it. And we have to tilt. It's not easy to do, and it's difficult to explain it. And at some point I'll take a video of this. But what we're doing here is we've got to get this end of this thing all the way up into about here somewhere. We'll draw it in black again. We get this into about here somewhere, this rod, this end, so we can see what's going on. And then we have kind of a flexible tube that we use to put the semen through. And we have to kind of muck around with this and get this so that flexible tube will go all the way up into here like that. And that's what we're doing. So we've got that flexible tube, and we tilt this around, move things around, push it around a little bit, and we get that tube all the way up into the horns of the uterus. The uterus, I've not drawn this quite accurately actually. Let's just redraw this slightly. It's a little bit different than what I'm showing here. So there's the os, and that is correct. The os then goes into two, further on up here, two horns. So these are the horns up here. And this is the ovaries right here, producing the eggs. So when we do the surgical, we're right in here. When we do the transcervical, we're getting into the horns. We're getting into there's two tubes that bifurcate and go up to the horns. We're getting it right here. We don't get it all up in there. So we're not going to get this all the way up into the uterus. What we're going to do is we're going to get it into the horns, the piping that goes to the horns. All right. So, which three of these should you use? They're all fine. I mean, if you're doing this at home, you're not, unless you buy an endoscope, you learn how to do it, that I'm in the process of doing, you're not going to do the TCI. You're not doing the TCI. That's going to be for the vet to do. If you're doing a transcervical, if you're doing a surgical, of course, that does absolutely require the vet. They've got to use anesthesia, put the dog under for a few minutes, make an incision, get inside, keep everything sterile, and put it directly in there. What you and I can do, and what most vets do, is simply a vaginal AI, and that works great. And so what I recommend on a vaginal AI is typically to do two days apart. All right, I think that's enough of that. bit long-winded, but anyway, hopefully that helps people. Like, the important part here is I want to explain this structure to you so you can see exactly what you're doing when you do a vaginal AI. Got questions? Then write to us and let us know down below. And if you like what we're doing, then subscribe to our YouTube page. We'd really appreciate that. If you've got comments, other things you want to watch, then talk about, then let us know about that. And thanks for watching. We appreciate that. And you know, the most important thing is be nice to your doggies. Bye, everybody.